Thinking, Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman is a Nobel Prize-winning psychologist whose groundbreaking research reshaped our understanding of human judgment and decision-making. His seminal work, Thinking, Fast and Slow, unveils the two systems that drive our thoughts, the fast, intuitive System 1 and the slow, deliberate System 2. This book masterfully reveals the astonishing capabilities and hidden biases of our minds, explaining why we often make irrational choices despite our best intentions. It reveals that to think better, we must first understand the machinery of our own mind, its brilliant shortcuts, and its inherent flaws. Part 1. Two Systems. To understand your mind, you must meet its two central characters. System 1 operates automatically and quickly, with little or no effort and no sense of voluntary control. When you look at a photo of a woman with an angry expression, you instantly recognize her emotion. This is System 1 at work. It also solves 2 plus 2 effortlessly. System 2 allocates attention to the effortful mental activities that demand it, including complex computations. The same brain that instantly knows 2 plus 2 must laboriously engage to solve 17 by 24, a task for System 2. System 2 is also lazy and often endorses the intuitive judgments of System 1 without scrutiny. These systems constantly interact. Your orienting to a sudden, loud sound is a pure System 1 reflex, but deciding to investigate the source further is a shift to System 2. Most of your judgments and choices are guided by the intuitive System 1, with the lazy System 2 frequently signing off on its suggestions. Attention and effort. The operations of your deliberate System 2 require precious mental resources, a finite pool of attention and effort that is easily depleted. This is visibly demonstrated through pupillometry research, which shows that your pupils dilate proportionally to the mental effort you are expending, providing a clear physiological window into the cost of concentration. This limited capacity is starkly revealed in dual task interference. Try to memorize a complex number while simultaneously navigating a difficult, unfamiliar road, and you will find one or both tasks suffering severely as your cognitive resources are stretched beyond their limit. This intense focus can lead to a state of ego depletion, where your ability to exert self-control or perform subsequent demanding tasks is temporarily reduced because your mental fuel tank is empty. Given this high cost, your mind follows a law of least mental effort, naturally defaulting to the automatic, effortless suggestions of System 1 whenever possible to conserve your limited attentional budget. System 2 is expensive to run, so it is often kept in a low-effort standby mode, intervening only when System 1 encounters a problem it cannot solve or when you consciously decide to engage it. This laziness is perfectly captured by the bat and ball problem, stating that a bat and a ball cost $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Usually the intuitive answer, which is 10 cents, is wrong because it satisfies the first part of the problem, but not the second. If the ball were 10 cents, the bat would be $1.10, making the total $1.20. The correct answer is 5 cents. To arrive at the correct answer of 5 cents, your lazy System 2 must actively engage to override this compelling but wrong intuition, an effort it often avoids. This tendency is amplified when you are in a state of cognitive strain or ego depletion. When you are tired, stressed, or have just completed a demanding task, System 2 becomes even lazier and moodier. In this depleted state, you are significantly more likely to accept System 1's faulty suggestions, rely on stereotypes, and make impulsive judgments. Your capacity for careful reasoning is not a constant. It fluctuates with your mental energy, and the lazy controller is always looking for an excuse to take a nap. The associative machine. Your mind is not an orderly filing cabinet. It is a vast, humming associative machine. Ideas, feelings, and sensations are all connected in a dense network, and activating one node automatically lights up its neighbors. This is the principle of priming. In experiments, being exposed to the word eat makes you momentarily more likely to complete the fragment S__P as soup rather than soap, because the concept of food has been subtly activated. This influence extends beyond words to your physical behavior, as demonstrated by the famous Florida effect. Participants who were primed with words associated with the elderly subsequently walked more slowly down a hallway after the experiment, without any conscious awareness of the connection. This is mental contagion in action, where concepts unconsciously spread through your associative network and directly influence your actions. Your conscious mind may believe it is in charge, but beneath the surface, System 1's associative machinery is constantly shaping your perceptions, your judgments, and even the way you move through the world, all without your conscious consent or even knowledge. Cognitive ease. When something feels easy to process, whether because it is familiar, clearly written, or has been repeated, you experience a sense of cognitive ease. This feeling is pleasant, and System 1 interprets it as a signal of truth and safety, leading to the illusion of truth effect, where you are more likely to believe a statement simply because it feels familiar and easy to comprehend. This is why the mere exposure effect occurs. Repeated exposure to a neutral stimulus, like a foreign word or a face, makes you like it more, simply because the repeated exposure has made it easier for your mind to process. However, this creates a confusion between familiarity and truth. Your System 1 often cannot tell the difference. Conversely, when you experience cognitive strain, triggered by anything that is difficult to process, like a poor font, complex language, or a confusing instruction, your mind becomes more alert and suspicious. System 2 is partially mobilized, making you more likely to detect inconsistencies and less likely to believe what you see or read. Your state of cognitive ease or strain acts as a subtle but pervasive mental setting, influencing your mood, your intuition, and your readiness to believe or doubt. Norms, surprises, and causes. Your mind maintains a running model of a normal world, built from your experiences, and it constantly checks incoming events against this model. When something happens that fits this model, it registers as normal and passes by with little attention. However, when an event violates your expectations, it triggers an automatic surprise response, a jolt that immediately captures your attention and mobilizes your cognitive resources. This surprise also activates a powerful, cause-seeking nature in your System 1. Your mind cannot help but try to explain the unexpected event, instantly constructing a causal narrative to make sense of it. This process is heavily influenced by the temporal proximity illusion, where events that occur close together in time are easily woven into a cause and effect story, whether they are truly related or not. This cause-seeking nature is often leading you to see intentionality and causality in situations that are merely coincidental. Your brain is a meaning-making machine, and it would rather invent a plausible cause than accept randomness. A machine for jumping to conclusions. Your System 1 excels at constructing the most coherent story possible from the limited information available at any given moment, operating under the what you see is all there is rule. It focuses exclusively on the evidence presented, actively ignoring missing information and ambiguities to create a swift, seemingly complete narrative. This process is reinforced by a strong confirmation bias, where System 1 selectively seeks and accepts information that fits the emerging story while disregarding contradictory data. This tendency also manifests in the halo effect, where an overall positive impression of a person, perhaps because they are attractive or likable, makes you more likely to judge their specific traits, like intelligence or honesty, positively as well, based on the initial glow. How judgments happen. Your complex judgments are not built from scratch. They are constructed on a foundation of basic assessments that your System 1 performs automatically and continuously. These include intuitive evaluations of size, distance, similarity, and even causal relations, all computed without your conscious effort. This process works like a mental shotgun, firing off a broad volley of these assessments simultaneously, many of which are irrelevant to your immediate task but are generated anyway. A powerful driver of these judgments is the effect heuristic, where your immediate gut feeling of liking or disliking something directly shapes your judgments of its risks and benefits, leading you to judge what you like as also being good and safe, and what you dislike as bad and risky. Answering an easier question. When faced with a complex or difficult question, your mind has a clever but often misleading trick. It frequently substitutes an easier, related question and answers that one instead, usually without you ever noticing the switch. This is the substitution principle at work. For example, if you are asked the target question, "How happy is Pauline?" After reading a description of her life, you might find yourself answering the simpler heuristic question, "How admirable does Pauline's life seem?" The substitution occurs seamlessly because it offers mental ease, providing a swift, satisfactory answer that feels like a genuine response to the original query. This process is driven by your System 1, which excels at constructing coherent narratives from available information. The confidence you feel in your answer is largely an illusion of confidence from coherence. It stems from the internal consistency and plausibility of the story system one has woven, not from the actual validity or depth of your reasoning. You are often unaware that you are answering a different, easier question, and the sense of cognitive ease that comes with a coherent narrative makes you trust the judgment. This mechanism underlies many intuitive judgments and is a fundamental reason why your answers to complex questions can be heavily influenced by irrelevant but easily processed information. Part 2. Heuristics and Biases. The Law of Small Numbers. You intuitively believe in the law of small numbers, the mistaken idea that a small sample is highly representative of the larger population it comes from. This leads you to place far too much faith in results from limited data and to see patterns where none exist. When asked whether a small hospital or a large hospital is more likely to have a day where over 60% of the babies born are boys, most people incorrectly say they are equally likely. In reality, a large sample is much more likely to be close to the true 50-50 ratio, while a small sample has much higher variability and is more prone to such extreme deviations purely by chance. Your System 1, however, is not comfortable with this statistical reality. This leads to a confidence over precision bias, where you feel unjustified certainty in conclusions drawn from tiny samples. Anchors. Your judgments and estimates are remarkably susceptible to the anchoring effect, a cognitive bias where any initial number you encounter, even an arbitrary one, can powerfully influence your subsequent numerical guesses. In the famous Wheel of Fortune experiment, Participants watched a wheel that was rigged to land on either 10 or 65. They were then asked to estimate the percentage of African nations in the United Nations. Those who saw the wheel land on 10 gave a much lower average estimate than those who saw it land on 65, despite knowing the number was random. This happens through a process of insufficient adjustment. When making an estimate, you start from the anchor as a reference point and adjust away from it, but you typically stop adjusting too soon, remaining closer to the anchor than you should. This is not just a laboratory curiosity. Anchoring is a powerful force in real-world negotiations. The first number put on the table in a salary discussion, the initial price quoted for a car, or the damages requested in a lawsuit all act as powerful anchors that can heavily skew the final outcome. The science of availability. When you need to judge how often something happens or how likely it is, you often rely on the availability heuristic, a mental shortcut where you base your estimate on the ease with which relevant examples pop into your mind. The ease of retrieval itself is what you use as a proxy for frequency. If you can quickly recall several instances of an event, you assume it must be common. This is demonstrated in the famous names experiment, where people judged a list containing famous male names and non-famous female names as having more men because the famous names were more cognitively available. This heuristic is powerfully shaped by media influence. The availability heuristic also affects personal judgments, as seen in the self-rated contribution to chore study, where couples' estimates of their individual contributions often add up to more than 100%. Each person finds their own chores and efforts more mentally available, leading them to overestimate their share. Your judgment is biased by what you can most easily remember, not by what is most statistically true. Availability, emotion, and risk. Your perception of risk is not a cold, statistical calculation. It is powerfully driven by the effect heuristic, where your emotional reaction to a potential hazard largely determines how risky you judge it to be. Events that evoke a strong sense of dread and uncontrollability, like a nuclear meltdown or a terrorist attack, are perceived as far more threatening than statistically more dangerous, but less emotionally charged events, like diabetes or strokes. This is compounded by the psychophysics of probability, where your mind fails to distinguish between very small probabilities, treating a 1 in a million chance as emotionally similar to a 1 in 10 million chance. A vivid, catastrophic image can dominate your judgment, making you willing to spend enormous resources to avoid a minuscule risk while ignoring more probable threats. Dramatic, vivid events like plane crashes or shark attacks receive extensive news coverage, making them highly available and leading you to overestimate their probability over more common but less sensational causes of death, like asthma. Your risk assessment is thus a blend of memory availability and emotional intensity, often leading to policies and personal choices that are misaligned with actual statistical dangers as you overreact to rare horrors and underreact to common ones. Tom W.'s specialty. When judging probability, you often rely on the representativeness heuristic, where you assess how much a specific case resembles a typical prototype, while largely ignoring crucial statistical information. This is illustrated by the Tom W. problem. You are given a personality sketch of a fictional graduate student described as intelligent, lacking empathy, and having a passion for detail. You are then asked to rank the likelihood of him being in different graduate programs. Most people rank computer science or engineering as highly likely because Tom fits the stereotype of a computer scientist, and humanities education as very unlikely because he does not fit that stereotype. In doing this, you engage in base rate neglect completely overlooking the fact that there are far more graduate students in humanities education than in computer science, making it statistically more likely for any random graduate student, including Tom, to be in humanities. Linda, less is more. The Linda problem stands as a classic demonstration of how intuitive judgments of probability can systematically violate fundamental logical rules. In the experiment, participants are given a description of Linda as a woman who is a philosophy major, deeply concerned with social justice and discrimination. They are then asked to compare the probability of two statements, that Linda is a bank teller versus that Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. Logically, the single statement bank teller must be more probable because the category of all bank tellers includes those who are feminist activists and those who are not. However, a majority of participants commit the conjunction fallacy, judging the specific combination feminist bank teller as more likely, even though a conjunction of two events can never be more probable than one of its parts. This error occurs because the detailed personality description makes Linda seem highly representative of a feminist activist. The added detail creates a more causally coherent and plausible narrative, which System 1 finds compelling. This creates the less is more paradox, where adding more detail to a scenario, making it more specific, mathematically reduces its probability, yet the intuitive judgment, driven by the allure of a good story, perceives it as more likely. The experiment reveals a powerful reliance on narrative plausibility over statistical reality. Regression to the mean. Extreme performances are typically followed by more average ones, a statistical reality known as regression to the mean. This phenomenon is often misunderstood as a causal effect. Flight instructors observed that when a student made an exceptionally smooth landing and was praised, the next landing was often worse. Conversely, after a poor landing that drew criticism, the next attempt was often better. This led them to believe, incorrectly, that punishment was more effective than reward. In reality, both outcomes were examples of regression. The first excellent landing was an outlier, likely to be followed by a more typical, less perfect performance. The terrible landing was also an outlier, likely to be followed by a less terrible, more average one. The human mind engages in a causal misinterpretation of such events, instinctively seeking stories about complacency after praise or learning from criticism. This is why the Sports Illustrated jinx seems plausible. An athlete's cover-worthy performance is often a peak, making a subsequent return to their average performance appear to be a decline caused by the cover feature, when it is merely statistical regression. Taming intuitive predictions. Intuitive predictions are often unreasonably extreme because they are based on the inside view, which focuses exclusively on the specific, often vivid, details of a single case while ignoring the broader statistical reality. This leads to the planning fallacy, where forecasts for project completion times or costs are consistently over-optimistic because they are built on a best-case scenario narrative, disregarding how similar projects have actually fared. The antidote is to adopt the outside view, which involves reference class forecasting. This method requires identifying a relevant class of similar past cases and using the distribution of outcomes from that class as the baseline prediction. To formally correct an intuitive prediction, a two-step process is recommended. First, start with an average prediction based on the base rate, the outside view. Second, adjust from this average based on the strength and reliability of the specific evidence for the case at hand, but do so moderately and with skepticism. This adjustment should be a fraction of what your intuition initially suggests. Part 3. Overconfidence. The illusion of understanding. The human mind possesses a powerful, yet misleading, tendency to construct coherent stories about the past, creating an illusion of understanding. This narrative fallacy makes past events appear orderly, inevitable, and much more predictable than they actually were at the time. This is closely linked to the "I knew it all along" effect, where learning an outcome retroactively distorts your memory of your own prior expectations, making you believe you foresaw what was, in reality, uncertain. For instance, the story of Google's rise to dominance now seems like an obvious and inevitable trajectory, but this narrative ignores the countless contingencies, near failures, and alternative possibilities that were present at every step. These simplified stories provide a sense of cognitive ease, transforming a chaotic and complex sequence of events into a clean, comprehensible cause and effect chain that is easy to process and recall, while your mind completely ignores the vast landscape of unknown alternatives and sheer luck that also played a role. The illusion of validity. People consistently experience an illusion of validity, maintaining unwarranted confidence in their judgments and predictions even when faced with clear evidence of their inaccuracy. An officer recounts his experience on a team that interviewed candidates for officer training in the Army. Despite receiving clear feedback that their predictions of candidate success were only slightly better than random, the assessors retained a profound sense of certainty in their specific evaluations for each new candidate. This confidence stems not from actual predictive accuracy, but from a confidence from coherence mechanism. This illusion is further sustained by a skill versus luck misattribution, where successful predictions are credited to one's acumen, while failures are dismissed as unforeseeable bad luck. The persistence of this illusion is remarkable, as even experts who are intellectually aware of the bias and the low validity of their predictions in a given domain continue to feel subjectively confident in the moment of judgment, unable to switch off the compelling sense of certainty generated. Intuitions versus formulas. Decades of research in the clinical versus statistical prediction debate have yielded a robust and uncomfortable conclusion. Simple statistical formulas consistently outperform expert intuition in a wide range of forecasting tasks. This is not due to a flaw in experts, but to the inherent superiority of consistent, rule-based methods over the noisy, context-sensitive nature of human judgment. A classic example is the APGAR score, a straightforward formula used to assess the health of newborns. By assigning points for heart rate, breathing, muscle tone, and other factors, it provides a rapid, objective, and highly accurate assessment that replaced more subjective clinical impressions. The robustness of formulas lies in their immunity to the fatigue, biases, and irrelevant cues that can distort an expert's judgment on any given day. Despite this overwhelming evidence, there is a profound resistance to algorithms among professionals, who often feel their hard-won experience and nuanced understanding cannot be captured by a simple model, even when the data clearly shows otherwise. The evidence suggests that for many predictive tasks, a good formula is not just helpful, it is fundamentally better than even the best human intuition. The engine of capitalism. The driving force of capitalism is not cold, rational calculation, but a powerful and often delusional optimism bias among entrepreneurs. When starting a venture, individuals display a systematic and statistically unwarranted optimism, vastly overestimating their probability of success. This is compounded by competition neglect, where they focus intently on their own plan and skills while failing to adequately account for the actions and even existence of competitors who share the same dream. This overconfidence is further fueled by the illusion of control, the belief that their talent and effort will allow them to master an unpredictable market. While this leads to a high rate of individual failure, however, if every potential entrepreneur accurately assessed the true low odds of success, few would ever take the risk. Part 4. Choices. Bernoulli's errors and prospect theory. For centuries, Daniel Bernoulli's expected utility theory was the standard model for decision-making, proposing that people make rational choices based on the final state of their wealth. While Bernoulli correctly identified the principle of diminishing sensitivity, that the psychological value of money decreases as you have more of it, his theory contained a critical flaw. He assumed that the carrier of value was your total wealth. The error lies in this assumption. As illustrated by prospect theory, in reality, you do not think in terms of final wealth. You think in terms of gains and losses relative to a reference point, which is usually your current state, your status quo. You evaluate outcomes based on changes from this neutral point. This insight is crucial because it reveals why Bernoulli's model fails to explain a fundamental aspect of your behavior, your extreme sensitivity to losses. The pain of losing a sum of money is psychologically far more powerful than the pleasure of gaining the same amount, a phenomenon his theory could not account for. Prospect theory also illustrates that people are risk-averse when facing a sure gain. You would rather have a sure $900 than a 90% chance of $1,000, but risk-seeking when facing a sure loss. You would gamble on a 90% chance to lose $1,000, rather than accept a sure loss of $900. This is due to the certainty effect, where you overweigh outcomes that are considered certain compared to outcomes that are merely probable. This leads you to make irrationally conservative choices to lock in a sure gain and irrationally risky choices to avoid a sure loss. The endowment effect. You value things more simply because you own them. In the mug experiment, when some participants were given a mug and became owners, they set a minimum selling price that was roughly twice as high as the maximum buying price set by other participants who did not own a mug. The same object was worth more to the seller than to the buyer. This irrational disparity is not due to any special love for the mug, but is a direct consequence of loss aversion. For the owner, giving up the mug is experienced as a loss, and because losses loom larger than gains, they demand a higher price to compensate for that perceived loss. The buyer, who does not own the mug, views acquiring it as a gain, which they value less. This effect creates a powerful status quo bias, a preference for the current state of affairs because any change from your current endowment is immediately framed as a potential loss relative to your neutral reference point, which has now shifted to include the owned object. Your sense of value is not absolute. It is profoundly shaped by ownership and the psychology of loss. Bad events. Your mind is wired to respond more strongly to bad events than to good ones, a principle known as negativity dominance. This principle extends far beyond finance. It is a general bad is stronger than good phenomenon that permeates your life. A single critical comment can overshadow a dozen praises, and a social snub hurts more than a compliment pleases. This asymmetry applies powerfully to social exchanges, where the pain of losing a friend, a bit of status, or trust is far more impactful than the pleasure of acquiring a new social connection. Your entire psychological makeup is tilted toward avoiding negatives, making you more sensitive to threats and setbacks than to opportunities and wins. Risk policies. To overcome the inconsistent and often costly risk attitudes, you can adopt a risk policy, a broad decision-making rule that you apply consistently across similar situations. The key to implementing this is to shift from narrow framing, where you evaluate each risky choice in isolation, to broad framing, where you view each decision as one of many similar gambles in a larger portfolio. Narrow framing makes you a slave to the immediate emotional context of each choice, leading you to be risk-averse for some gains and risk-seeking for some losses. The economist Paul Samuelson refused a single, favorable bet offered by a colleague, finding the isolated risk unpalatable, but he immediately agreed to take 100 such bets, recognizing that in the broad frame, the law of large numbers would make the positive expected value a near certainty. By adopting broad framing and a consistent risk policy, you can make decisions that are better in the long run, aligning your choices with the cold logic of expected value rather than the hot emotions of the moment. Keeping score. Your mind instinctively keeps score using mental accounts, separate psychological ledgers for different activities, goals, or time periods, which leads to systematically irrational financial behavior. A classic error is the sunk cost fallacy, where you throw good money after bad, continuing to invest in a failing project because you cannot bear to close the account with a loss. In investing, this manifests as the disposition effect, where you are quick to sell stocks that have gained in value, to realize the gain and enjoy the pleasure of closing a mental account with a win, but you hold on to losing stocks too long, delaying the pain of closing an account with a loss. This behavior is financially costly, as it means selling your winners and keeping your losers. Similarly, you are more willing to gamble with money that feels like found money, such as recent casino winnings, because it resides in a separate mental account from your hard-earned salary. Your desire to keep score and experience the satisfaction of closing accounts with gains often overrides rational financial decision-making. Reversals. Your preferences are not stable. They can reverse dramatically based on how a choice is presented, a phenomenon known as preference reversals. A key driver is whether you evaluate options jointly, side by side, or separately in isolation. This can lead you to choose option A when seeing it alone and option B when seeing it alone, but prefer B over A when they are compared directly. Frames and reality. The principle of invariance in rational choice states that your preferences should not change based on logically equivalent descriptions of the same problem. However, in psychological reality, frames are everything. Different representations of identical information evoke different responses, leading to inconsistent choices. For instance, a disease prevention program is more appealing when framed as saving 200 lives out of 600, rather than resulting in 400 deaths, though the outcome is identical. This framing effect also governs the sunk cost paradigm. When you frame a decision around the past investment of money, time, or effort, you fall prey to the sunk cost fallacy and continue a failing project. But if you frame the same decision purely around future consequences, ignoring past costs, you are more likely to make the rational choice to cut your losses. Your susceptibility to framing reveals that your decisions are not made by a cold, logical calculator, but by an emotional system that is deeply sensitive to how options are presented, often prioritizing the avoidance of perceived losses over the consistent application of logic.
Thank you for listening to this audiobook. Your interaction matters, so don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And tell us in the comments which book you want to listen to.